Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Policy Debate Central podcast. My name is Raleigh Maxwell, and today we are kicking off our first episode of our new Debate Legends series with Dr. Ralph Wesley, former debater for the University of Kentucky. Is that right?
That's correct.
Awesome. Dr. Wesley helped start his high school debate program. Also true?
True.
Awesome. And went on to have a very successful career as a Wildcat. Dr. Wesley is now an ophthalmic surgeon in Nashville. Is that how you pronounce that?
Ophthalmic plastic surgeon.
Plastic surgeon. Okay. Yes, sir. I'd like to extend a formal welcome to you, Dr. Wesley. We're very excited to have you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here and to have a chance to learn from you.
So the first thing I just have to ask you is where it all began. So I guess in high school, what got you interested in debate? What led you to kind of start a program at your high school?
It started with the Sputnik.
Sputnik.
One Friday night when I was maybe in the 7th grade, we got home we didn't have cell phones then. We got home and my parents said the Russians had put a satellite up. This sent a shock throughout our country. It's just hard to believe. We realized we were so far behind in space. Congress reacted by passing what's called the National Defense Education Act, the NDEA, and it included science, it included foreign language, included a lot of things. And so our school got some money for teachers. My mother was an English teacher, and she went to the down to the University of Tennessee from Kentucky, and really became fluent in French. And another year went in journalism. Well, we got the idea from our science teacher. There was a science institute 8 weeks during the summer after our sophomore year down at Murray. Now there were 44 in my class in my county school. We had good teachers, but my friend and I spent 8 weeks down at Murray State because that program was available because of the Sputnik going up. And we really learned about science, and even at Vanderbilt Medical School, I never had a course as difficult. So the next year, we went to a speech institute. My mother was our coach, and she sent us up to Ohio University. We got a scholarship to go up to Ohio University. We had never seen anything so different. The names of everyone were different. We were the only ones from the South.
Right.
They were from Chicago and Cleveland and whatnot. And I can remember in the middle of the tournament thinking, we are just so overwhelmed with this. I'd just like to go home right now. And we ended up two country boys going 7-0
Wow.
and winning the Ohio University tournament. So now we then go for 2 weeks at the University of Kentucky and spent time there, and we really prepared. I lived 30 miles from the University of Kentucky in a little place called Carlisle, and I had a driver's license by this time. And I would drive over to the University of Kentucky Library. Back then, we had to have the Reader's Guide. Nothing was computerized. You had to look it up. But it was an incredible asset for us. And so we got really deep into things. It had to do with the common market. The topic had to do with a common market for the Western Hemisphere. There were a lot of economic terms I didn't understand. And I worked on those, and that's why I actually majored in economics when I was in college. So if it hadn't been for the NDEA, the Russians sending up the Sputnik, I never would have been on that pathway.
Right. That's a very interesting story just to hear kind of how Sputnik started your debate career. So I would like to ask you about what high school debate was like then. So obviously it's not that different, but it's a little different nowadays. So I'd love to talk about what were the topics, like you mentioned, trade, I think.
Yes.
So what were the topics like, I guess?
Well, the senior year, it was the first year that we debated. It was that the federal government should provide grants to the states for secondary education, and that was a big issue, whether there'd be federal control of the states and whatnot. The next year, it was that the United States, the European Common Market was 6 countries, the Benelux countries, was very, very successful. It started about 1958 and was really rampant, and that we should start a common market for the entire Western Hemisphere. So it brought in a lot of economics, and a lot of terms I didn't understand
right.
until I finally became an
Right.
economics major.
Yeah, we had an econ topic my senior year, and I remember like starting it, and I was like, I don't know really anything we're talking about. By the end, it was like, okay, I know enough to convince people I know stuff.
You get very motivated because you know you're going to go into a debate. Somebody's going to know about it, and you don't.
Right. Yeah, you need to be there.
It's amazing how motivated debaters are to be on top of things.
Very competitive. It's a great activity. And then so I guess like tournaments. I guess like where were you traveling mainly for like tournaments throughout the year in high school?
Well, most of them were in Kentucky. We went up to one at Dayton, Ohio, and it turns out we got up there and it was four-man debate, not two-man. And so I was the negative because they didn't want to mess up their schedule.
Right.
And my partner did the affirmative and had to do all the speeches and everything like that. So it really was a washout. But most of the tournaments, the Mason-Dixon tournament was a big one, and it was held in Kentucky. And there were tournaments in Lexington and also down toward Louisville. But the University of Kentucky had a Debate of the Month series, and we were so shocked that we were invited to be in the Debate of the Month series in the first one, and after 3 wins you got to retire, and we were up against teams that we never thought we would debate. But I would drive over to the UK, go in the library. I knew how to get the to understand the reader's guide, periodic literature. And so we were really deep on research, and we had a lot of things there. That made a big difference for a couple of hicks from Carlisle.
And so just like research, that was just like going to the library, like checking out books and like copy cutting and...
A lot of it, we didn't have the ability to photocopy back then.
Okay.
And we couldn't shoot pictures. I wish we had digital cameras, things like that. But we had to basically write it handwriting. Now, I took 8 years of piano, and I was a terrible pianist. But when I hit typing in school, in high school, it's like the keys are all right there. And I was an incredible typist. So I typed all this stuff up so we could read it.
Wow, yeah.
And in fact, I typed some in college, people that needed papers typed. So
yeah, it's a great skill to have.
If you need typing, I'll help you. Forget the piano.
Yeah, right. And then correct me if I'm wrong, but so you won the Barkley Forum tournament
in college? Yes.
Okay,
yes,
college.
We did.
Okay.
That was my sophomore year.
Right.
And I got the top speaker award for it. I'm never more flattered. And Alvin Barkley was from Kentucky, as a matter of fact.
Right.
He's really a famous person.
Right.
He was sort of a quiet person, but I think he was a really, really an effective, respected politician.
And then I'd love to talk about kind of just like what the argument structure was like, just because kind of debates kind of evolved in that sense. So I guess was like high school debate at least very focused on like stock issues, if that was like something you remember, significance, inherency, or I guess like what kind of arguments would people read, like the terms?
Well, those are exactly the things we had. You know, there were the affirmative, of course, had the duty, and affirmatives generally did not win as many cases as the negative, because if the negative theoretically beat you on one issue, they had you.
Right.
So you needed to show that there was a need for a change. You need to show that you had a plan that would solve that.
Right.
Then you needed to defend it against newer and greater evils, that you were causing some new problem that was worse than what you ever started for. Then lastly, you had to be prepared just in case somebody came up with a counterplan. And when you go to all these different, especially with the common market in high school and somewhat in college, every once in a while you run into these teams that have they say, we agree with that, but we've got a plan here. And that got into an interesting debate. But the issues, when we looked at, if you were on the negative and somebody brought out an issue that needed to be covered, first of all, is it true? Is it significant? Yeah, there's a problem, but it doesn't amount to that much. Is it inherent? can we make some changes, without without having to redo the whole system. So those basic issues are always there.
Right. And then I guess, so you talked about counterplans. So kind of, was this like the early phases, like the introduction of a counterplan? Like, I can only imagine when someone entered a debate on the affirmative and the negative team stood up and just like brought up a counterplan and no one had ever done it before. Like that must have been, I don't know like when that was, but that must have been just mind-blowing, right?
Well, so I was always second affirmative, so that meant that I was going to have to deal with the counterplan.
Right.
And so we had to emphasize, first of all, stick with your case.
Right.
We need to change. We know this. We've got the data, and generally we're going to have a lot better, be a lot better on that. But then we're going to show why their plan is not going to work.
Right.
Here's the problems.
Right.
It does not address A, B, and C, and so and so. But you're right. All of a sudden, when you got a counter plan,
right.
It's just a different debate.
Changes the game.
Yeah.
And then I guess one thing I know that did kind of happen in the 60s, whether like you were in college, is called like the Emery switch. If you remember that, maybe that's something that's developed now, but
I'm not familiar with the Emery switch. Maybe I got switched.
Well, maybe they like created the term for it after. But so like on case arguments were made in the 2 and C, and off case arguments were made in the 1 and C. I guess like was that something that happened in college debate or
not back then?
Okay, not back then.
I'm totally unfamiliar with it.
Okay, just wanted to ask. And then okay, so back to kind of like your debate career, your progression. So right, like you debated in high school and then for Kentucky. So I guess like what was that process? Like was there like recruiting or like how did were you just wanted to debate at Kentucky? How was like the college process?
Well, I was recruited by Dino Curris. Dino Curris is probably the greatest debater ever. He just was his parents were from Greece. And they ran a Dairy Queen up in Williamstown, Kentucky. And Dino, he was so good on analysis. His analysis always was great, and he had a great speaking voice. And so Dino taught us a lot, even though he wasn't our coach. He was in graduate school when I was at the University of Kentucky, but he came over and worked with us also. And he had a big influence on us. We also had an insurance salesman who came every Tuesday and Thursday, and he had been one of the original debaters at UK back in the early 50s.
Oh, wow, right.
Joe Manus. And Joe Manus was always negative. And we said, why is that? He says, if somebody had a good idea, we would have already done it. He was kidding, but he came, he left his really a big insurance practice. I think the family were into horses there, but he devoted his time to the University of Kentucky, and he was one that would work on arguments more so than even our coach Lighton. And he was because he would ask you some pointed things. Really made you think. It was good to have somebody like that.
And then I guess like so the college debate scene, like who were the big schools that y'all competed against? What were the big tournaments?
We didn't fly to the West Coast or even so a lot of it was in the South, and of course Emory, Georgia was good, Auburn was good, Texas was good, and we would. However, in Kentucky, we'd go up to Ohio State and Michigan and places like that. They were drivable, but a lot of times we'd leave. Gosh, you'd leave on Wednesday afternoon, and you miss classes on Thursday and Friday, and maybe get back late Sunday. So it was a big thing. Now they all, even when my son was in NBA, they were flying places.
Right. Yeah, lots of flying now.
One time we went to a single debate at West Virginia University, and it was their football weekend. And I'll never forget, we flew what are called DC-3s. The old DC-3s were planes, 2 engines, and when the plane landed, it was, it wasn't flat. It was with the front was up and the tail was back, and you had to get in the plane. You had to kind of walk, pull yourself up to get in there. But we flew to Cincinnati, to Huntington, and then finally flew into the University of West Virginia, and that was a single debate. But we didn't do much single debates unless Harvard was going to come down. Everybody liked to
Right.
have Harvard come down, and we had an English team come one time, and
Oh, wow.
I was with one of the English people and one of our other people, so we took on, and they're
Oh, nice,
they're
nice.
so funny about
Yeah,
what they
right.
do and how they get on to
Right.
things.
Yeah. And then I guess, were there any like memorable topics or arguments developed in college debate?
Well, one of the things that we did, and one of the economic things was people didn't understand about what cartels were, and this is part of a common market. We studied that, and that was part of our thing. So people come up and they didn't know anything about cartels
Right.
or anything about it, and so we could kind of beat them on that and say, well, you're especially when we had a counterplan.
Right.
We
Right.
say it doesn't deal with that. It's going to take this.
Right.
We're going to have to work together on this.
Yeah. And then, so I guess so then you went to medical school, correct? And so I guess, what was that kind of choice like? Because I know a lot of debaters end up going to law school. They love kind of that. So how did debate influence your career course, I guess?
Well, I was headed to law school.
Oh, you went to law school? Okay.
I was headed to law
Headed
school.
to law school.
Headed
Okay.
to law school.
Right.
And I love the law. I just, I'd love to go over there and look up cases and things, and used to know how to do that. So my senior year, I had interviewed at Duke, and Dean Latty there, he took me in, and he says, "You remind me of myself. I was just coming out of a small town in Maine, and I didn't know what I wanted to do except I was going to go on." And as I talked to him, I said, I may want to do some extra training after law school. He said, "Son, that's a mistake. What people respect is somebody that goes to law school for 3 years and they get out and show that they're an aggressive young attorney. You don't need masters and you don't need things like that." He says, would you be interested in coming here if we had a scholarship here for so?" And he actually offered me a scholarship on the table. I got accepted to University of Virginia, which was my heroes were actually lawyers, and they were from the University of Virginia. And I saw how and I've seen that time and time again over the years, how they can explain the law
Right.
to the common farmers who had 8th grade education and they understood the legal terms. I just thought it was so great. But people ask me, why did I change? It was my senior year. It was the Vietnam War. They were drafting people as soon as you got out of college. And I decided to go to medical school. I'd taken a lot of science, but I did not have enough to apply to medical school, so I was going to have to come back. When I graduated, a friend of mine who was from Dayton, Ohio, got his notice from his draft board. He was going to be drafted. And instead, he joined the Navy, spent 4 years, became a linguist, and then went on later and got his PhD. I was from Carlisle, Kentucky, 1,600 people there, and we had a lot of people that volunteered. So once you signed up with wherever your draft board was, you couldn't switch. Well, Carlisle Nicholas County didn't need to draft people. So as soon as you got accepted in medical school, you were basically drafted exempt because they needed doctors. Right. So when I entered, that fall, right before the Tet Offensive, which you've heard of in Vietnam, when we really got overrun, I got accepted about that time and went on to medical school. But I just decided, I thought it was the career that I would be in the best. And I love the law, would love to have done it, but medicine for me was the right career, and ended up, I only applied 3 places, and one was Vanderbilt, and I wasn't sure I wanted to go to Vanderbilt, but I went out to a farm where old Judge Shepard was. He was shoveling manure, and my mother had died in the meantime. My father was about to die, and I just discussed it with him, and he said, "Well, he's shoveling I'm a mature, and I'm talking to him about my lifetime career, and he's a wise man, and he just said, "Well, which do you think's a better medical school?" And I said, "Kentucky is really good. They've got some new things there that I really like. I really think it's advanced, but maybe I would say Vanderbilt." And he said, "Well, blank, go to Vanderbilt." I said, "Okay," and I literally walked up the hill and went down to Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt was a school. It was so good to the students. It was a great place to go. Vanderbilt Medical School was more fun than high school ever was.
Right.
I mean, we worked hard, but it was a great attitude. The people were there to help you.
And then I guess like, so what were some aspects of like debate that kind of like helped you in your career? Just like thinking skills, like those kind of things. I know like everyone has like a different answer to this kind of stuff.
Well, let me give you a passive-aggressive answer that I have used.
Okay, yeah.
So I came back to Vanderbilt later on the faculty and started the oculoplastic surgery service. And after a few years, I couldn't get what I needed, and I was happy at Vanderbilt, but I moved to a private office and still did everything at Vanderbilt that I always did, didn't cost them anything. Well, we had medical students come to our office, and we had fellows and all this. So finally, they got a young MBA at Vanderbilt, and he went through this. He says, "We've got to have a contract on this. We've got to have this. We've got to have this done. We've got to have all the paperwork. We've been doing fine without the paperwork. Liability insurance was on me, covered everybody, whatever." So he said, "We're gonna need to talk to the lawyer and whatnot and so forth." I said, "It's getting toward Christmas, so this is called passive aggressive." I said, "Well, let me explain to you. We don't want to do this quickly. We want to make sure we do this right. Our process here is first." We try to identify that there is a problem, and that it's part of our system. It's inherent in the system, and it's important enough that we need to do something about it. Secondly, we need to have a plan about what we're going to do about this. And thirdly, we've got to make sure that the plan does what we want it to do. It corrects the problem, and then we've got to look at it and make sure it doesn't create some new problems. And he says, "Well, I'll call you when we can get you and the lawyer and me together." Never heard from him again.
It's a great way of thinking about things, though. Just going through
it is. You got to. This is our system here.
Right. Yeah. That's good. And then I do have to ask. So, I guess, was there like speed reading involved in debate when you were involved, or is that something like you just saw with your son's involvement?
When you say speed reading, speed speaking?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
And it wasn't. There was a team at Harrodsburg, Kentucky, and they were very dramatic. But no, we. I've been to debates where I couldn't understand what they were saying.
Right.
No.
Okay.
And I understand they've gotten past that and they've gotten back to debating again.
Right. Yes. And then I guess like, so your son debated at MBA, and then I guess, do you think kind of like the value of debate potentially has changed over its time? And I guess like what do you see different with like your son debating?
Oh, I think they at MBA they traveled so much further than we ever did, even though we were a major college team. But what was the old saying? It's better to debate without deciding than to decide without debating. And it's a system to look at things. Really, rather than hodgepodge. And you will find church committees you're going to be in, or organizations or whatnot, where people are sort of, and if you can kind of give them a little bit of focus or whatnot, it's very helpful in focus, so they're more efficient.
And then I guess I did want to circle back to something you said at the beginning. What were like the high school debate camps like?
Ohio University was really, really good. They were big in forensics at that time. So was Ohio State. And we had lectures, and we had learning library skills, which was important. And then we had a tournament at the end. And it was sort of similar at UK. They had a lot of guest speakers though that came in
Right.
that were on the topic of economics that
Right.
had to do with the
Right.
common market for the Western Hemisphere that year. And you got to know most of the people. Gosh, how many friends I made it there
Right,
throughout
right.
Kentucky. You know, if you were ever going to be a politician in Kentucky, going to the Debate Institute
Yeah.
would be a strong card.
And then I guess like on the topic of kind of like the people you met in debate, like are there any like good friends from high school debate or college debate you still keep in touch with?
Well, I'm hoping that Steve Beshear was a year. He was later governor of Kentucky.
Oh, right, right.
And his son is now
Andy
governor,
Beshear.
Andy,
And potentially the vice president.
and potentially the vice president and maybe the president. But Steve Beshear was a solid guy, and his son is a solid guy, and he's a Democrat elected now. What's a Republican state? People respect him.
So Steve Beshear, he did debate, and you
Yes.
knew him through that? Okay.
Yeah, Dino Curris was probably the greatest ever, and he became president of Clemson. He was president of Murray State. He was president of a college up at, and he was later head of the college and university councils. The people went on and were really successful. Matter of fact.
And then, so your debate partner from high school, I guess, did he do college debate or did he continue on with it?
He did. He debated at Morehead State and did well. He went on, became a college professor. My partner, the latter part of college, went to Harvard. He was a year behind me. He went to Harvard Law School and later argued some cases. He practiced in Washington. Later argued cases in the Supreme Court.
Wow, right, yeah. That's really cool. Lots of debate skills there, I guess. And then I guess just to kind of wrap things up here, is there anything that you would want to share just reflecting on your time in debate and your why you value debate?
Yeah, it really changed my, it just really changed my career. And I found that when I was in a meeting, I didn't really have desire to be, big in the medical society or whatnot, but just kind of steering people, not trying to argue with them or cut them down, but in fact, Joe Manus, who was our coach, he said, he says, the bad teams, you're going to score poorly. So a lot of times we'd say, well, we understand the value of that argument, so we kind of build their argument up, then we'd knock it down. Try to do things like that.
Yeah.
But I remember that the coaches, we had some really good help. And Joe Manus would come. He came and if we were someplace else and on a weekend we finished the tournament, we called him and said, well, we went 15-1. He said, who lost? He had this face just like that. He was so funny.
Yeah.
He says, if it was a good idea, we would have already done it.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, I'm flattered.
Yeah. And that concludes our first episode of Debate Legends. Thank you all for listening, and feel free to reach out to us with any questions or inquiries at policydebatecentral@gmail.com. See you next time.